Hi gang, back with another collection of models to zoom in and out of and spin around. This time it's my all-metal 90s Zinch Demon army. 5 or 6 years ago, I bought a big box of 90s metal demons a friend of a friend had found in their loft. It was a real mix of eras, so I went through and sorted them all, selling some of the incongruous stuff on eBay and using the proceeds to fill out the other units. That gave me at least a small force for each of the Chaos Powers, and I used an Age of Sigmar campaign day at the club in 2018 as an excuse to get these guys painted up. Yeah, they're on 40k terrain. I've mostly used these in Age of Sigmar, but I just don't have any suitable AOS terrain yet. I'm working on it. Anyway, they're demons, so they work in both. You might also have noticed that it's not the biggest army in the world, and I've mostly been using these mixed in with either Thousand Suns or Slave to Darkness. Most of the models in this army are the metal mid-90s demons that I remember from when I was a kid. They're big, chunky, goofy-looking models with over-the-top features and a fair few comedy elements. There was a later release of metal Zinch demons, but they were a bit more scary-looking, and I just prefer these guys. The only exception is the Greater Demon, the Lord of Change, who is one of the original early 90s, actually possibly 1989 models. There's a bigger mid-90s metal Lord of Change, but I've got a set of 4 of these originals, so I wasn't going to make an exception. Anyway, I'm pretty sure there was a point in the 90s when all these models were sold together. Let's look what's in the army. So first, I've got a big bunch of pink horrors of Tzeentch. In a parody of Games Workshop's heroic scale, these guys are all faces and hands. There were a couple of releases of these in which I think the models got a bit bigger over time, but I've mixed them all in together here. They usually run as a unit of 10 in Age of Sigmar with spares for, demon shenanigans. Now, heralds weren't a thing in the 90s, so I singled out the 2 horror champions I had, the ones with beaks, and placed them on bigger bases to act as my heralds. There are 2, one on foot and one on one of these teeny tiny classic 90s discs. I think in modern Age of Sigmar language, the one on foot is a change caster and the one on the disc counts as a flux master. They're then supported by a bunch of blue horrors of Tzeentch, because you need blue horrors of Tzeentch if you've got pink ones. These are fun little models on 25mm bases. I've given a few of the different groups of them slightly different paint jobs, as I tend to find that at the end of a game I have a few small units of these running around the table. Now, the biggest thing I had to think about was what the hell do you do for Brimstone Horrors? They never existed in the 90s, and I haven't really got a good counterpart for them yet. There are some epic scale metal horrors, but they're really pricey, especially for the numbers you'd need for Brimstones. So at the moment, if I need some Brimstone Horrors, I just use these little Gale Force 9 fire tokens on bases. At the moment, I kind of prefer this to mixing in modern plastics, but at some point, maybe I'll find a good solution. And the final unit are 9 of the original metal flamers of Zinch. These are actually really hard to keep together. The arms have a tendency to snap off as they're so much more spindly than their big mushroom bodies, but I just really like the models. Their big squawky beaks make them look like some sort of Jim Henson reject design from the Labyrinth. It's just such a stupid idea for a creature. This little force is led by 2 big models. First, a late 90s Demon Prince, which I've converted with a spare Cybor axe piece. I think it's taken from one of their Roman Terminator equivalents. There were a few variants of this kit floating around. It was multi-part and you could give it different weapons, and they worked for both 40k and fantasy back then. These were the version that predated the current plastic model, which for some reason I always associate with 40k. I think these look much more like a classic fantasy devil character, when you don't paint them bright blue. And then finally, Big Bird himself, the classic Lord of Change. So I think this is the 1989 version, securely bolted to his base through that single point of contact. Every model released since this guy has a staff or a robe or something, but the original model just has a curved beak and wicked talons, and I quite like the fact that even in modern Age of Sigmar, that's still a weapon option. As I said, I've got one of each of these Greater Demons. I've painted up the Bloodthirster and the Great Unclean one, but the Keeper of Secrets is still stripped and awaiting reassembly. He's a bit little, so I've built up the base as much as I possibly can. I think if I ever get round to playing him in any setting where it matters, I'll build some sort of 120mm base terrain piece for this base to sit on top of. For now, I think he's fine on this 60mm. Various Lords of Change were supplied on a 60mm anyway. And that's it. That's everyone in the army. The paint job on these, as you can see, is pretty fast and dirty. They were primed white and then base coated in Montana Gold Sky Blue. Montana Gold's a range of craft and graffiti paints that's available in craft shops all over the UK. And there are loads of shades to pick from, so I use them a lot. I then went to town with the airbrushing them with a selection of Minotaur pinks and pale blues, and then Games Workshop Avalon Sunset on the heralds to just pick them out and make them obvious. I replicated all these colours on the Greater Demon's wings at the same time with just some masking tape. Once the airbrushing was done, there wasn't really a lot left to do. One of the things I like about demons is how fast they can be to paint, especially when they're demons that don't carry weapons around. They all got some bone teeth, pink tongues, the occasional bit of Vallejo grass green on the fingers, and a few Retributor gold trinkets and earrings and things. And then they were given a good coat of Vallejo spray gloss varnish and left to dry for 24 hours. Once the varnish was totally solid, the whole army was then given a lamp black oil wash, and then I removed the wash from the raised areas with cosmetic tips. This is how I do a lot of my armies, as it saves me highlighting, and I really dislike brush painting. Finally, the bases are resin slotter bases that I built and cast myself out of all sorts of bits and bobs. I think the slotter bases for models like this are just a lot more solid than pinning, and you can work over the top afterwards with green stuff and ballast to hide the tabs and holes once they're on. And there we go. It's not a big army, it's not a finely painted army, it's just a fun little batch of models that I can ally up with either my Fantasy Slaves of Darkness or my 40k Thousand Suns. And I'm sure in time I will get round to getting both those armies on the board and give them the zoomy in and out treatment too. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this little mini showcase, there are a couple more on my channel, as well as book reviews, background and history videos about Games Workshop games, and Let's Plays of old Games Workshop board games. And if you want to support the channel, there's a very simple Patreon at the link on the screen. See you next time.